Good morning. I have a preamble that I need to go through at the beginning of each of these meetings, so please bear with me. Welcome to today's meeting on Bill C-81, an act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. The objective of today's meeting is to continue the committee's thorough review of the bill. I would like to take a moment to remind both those participating in the proceedings as well as those observing the proceedings of the committee in person and on video that the committee adopted a motion on September 18th, which included instructions for the clerk to explore options to allow for full participation of all witnesses and members of the public on this study. As a result, the committee has made arrangements to make all meetings in relation to the study of Bill C-81 as accessible as possible in a variety of ways. This includes providing sign language interpretation and near real-time closed captioning in the room. Please note that both American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language are being offered to those in our audience. For those who would like to watch the American Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my left. For those who would like to watch the Quebec Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my right. In addition, please note that the first two rows of benches have been reserved for those who wish to avail themselves of these interpretation services. Screens displaying the near real-time closed captioning have also been set up, with the English text to my left and the French text to my right. The sign language interpreters in the room are also being video recorded for the eventual broadcast of the meeting to Parleview via the committee's website. In light of these arrangements, the committee would ask that if you need to leave the room during the meeting, please do not walk in front of the sign language interpreters. Instead, please use the extremities of the room. In addition, we would ask that those in the room remain seated as much as possible during the meeting so that everyone in the audience can clearly see the sign language interpretation. Finally, if a member of the audience requires assistance at any time, please notify a member of the staff or the committee clerk. Last meeting was our first meeting with the sign language interpretation, and you can tell from my tone and pace of trying to slow things down a little bit. Please take your time. I won't be as strict with the timing as usual, but we did have some issues in the first meeting with the interpretation having trouble keeping up with the speed of the speakers. If I get an indication that you do need to slow down, I will do this. Okay, so I'm not saying stop. I'm just saying slow down. Okay. Welcome to yeah. I'd like to welcome all of the witnesses here today. We have a very large group, so we'll get right to it. We have from the Treasury Board Secretariat, Yasmin LaRoche, Deputy Minister, Public Service Accessibility. Alex Benet, Chief Information Officer of the Government of Canada. Carl Trottier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Governance, Planning and Policy Sector, Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer. That is quite a business card. From Canadian Human Rights Commission, we have Marie-Claude Landry, Chief Commissioner, Marcella Day, Senior Policy Advisor, Policy and Legal Services Branch, and from Canada Post Corporation, Jessica L. McDonald, Chair of the Board of Directors and Interim President and Chief Executive Officer, and Susan Margles, thank you. Senior Vice President, Corporate Affairs. Welcome again to all of you, and I believe we are going to start with Yasmin LaRoche, Deputy Minister, Public Service Accessibility, and I believe we're 7 minutes? 7 minutes.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Hi, everybody. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de...
Thank you for the invitation to appear before your committee to discuss Bill C-81 today. I'm delighted to be accompanied by my colleagues to discuss this bill. Bill C-81 has a purpose to improve the quality of life for Canadians with disabilities through the progressive realization of a barrier-free Canada. Currently, barriers to accessibility continue to adversely impact Canadians with disabilities and their families.
Require organizations under federal jurisdiction to identify, remove, and prevent barriers to accessibility in 6 key areas: the built environment, employment, information and communications technologies, the procurement of goods and services, the delivery of programs and services, and transportation. And chief among these organizations is the Government of Canada. As such, the Accessible Canada Act has the potential to significantly change the way the federal public service does business and serves Canadians, as well as to improve the lives of federal employees with disabilities. As the largest employer in Canada, the government must lead by example, and our goal is a simple one: to make the public service of Canada the gold standard of an accessible and inclusive public service. Mais nous avons du pain sur la planche.
But we have our work cut out for us. Among the 12,000 respondents to the Public Service Employment Survey who self-identified as a person with a disability, many, too many, consistently report facing more challenges in the workplace than those without disabilities. Public servants with disabilities report higher rates of harassment, feeling emotionally drained after their workday, and that their work-related stress is high or very high. They also report about being less engaged, less empowered, and less respected than people without disabilities.
Taking action in its capacity as employer of the core public administration. And today I'd like to briefly outline some of the work that's currently taking place at the Secretariat. As the first ever Deputy Minister of Public Service Accessibility, just appointed in August, my team is charged with developing an overarching strategy and an implementation plan. Our work will be based on consultation with partners and stakeholders that will help the federal public service show leadership in meeting the requirements in the Accessible Canada Act. Mon bureau servira de centre névralgique et fournira des conseils.
The office will act as a hub, providing strategic advice on accessibility issues for all Government of Canada departments and agencies. We will leverage the expertise of partners in other levels of government, as well as both the private and nonprofit sectors.
The Government of Canada is to hire 5,000 new employees with disabilities by 2025. Beyond recruitment, we will also lead initiatives to remove barriers to inclusion and full participation in the workplace, and ensure employees with disabilities can access the adjustments they need in a timely manner. Our goal is to optimize productivity and maximize every employee's contributions. De plus, nous aiderons activement.
We will also take an active role in supporting departments and agencies in publicly reporting on their progress through multi-year accessibility plans. In this way, we can be held to account. While our office is new, much work is already underway thanks to my colleagues, like Carl Trottier in the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer. This office within TBS has been developing the diversity and inclusion strategy and action plan for the public service to be launched this fall. On recruitment, TBS is developing a strategy to address gaps and barriers for equity-seeking groups, including persons with disabilities. One of the components of the strategy will be to examine opportunities to reach Canadians with disabilities and further understand and address barriers to recruitment, retention, and engagement once in the public service.
Pilot programs, such as the Youth Accessibility Summer Employment Opportunity for students with disabilities, and its partnership with Live, Work, Play for people with intellectual disabilities. The Secretariat has identified the need to train and support managers and human resources professionals early in the recruitment process and to provide timely access to services such as Accessibility, Accommodation, and Adaptive Computer Technology Centre at Shared Services Canada. Mr. Chair, allow me to turn to the work now currently being led by my colleague Alex Binet, Canada's Chief Information Officer. Dans un milieu de travail moderne,
in a modern workplace, information and technology are key enablers that support collaboration, innovation, and mobility. However, in today's public service, information and communications technologies are not as accessible as they should be. Many work tools can pose accessibility and usability barriers to employees with disabilities. To address this, TBS is evolving the current suite of collaboration tools into an open and accessible digital workspace for public servants. Using modern, open-source technology and tools, this workspace will be accessible by design, ensuring that all of our employees can bring their diversity and passion to the table to provide better services to Canadians.
Canada recently released the digital standards, which include accessibility by design. As the government continues to transition towards digital, a key focus will be keeping user needs, including accessibility, at the forefront of the design of all government services and operations. En terminant, je dirais...
In closing, let me say plainly that the public service should reflect the diverse nature of the citizens it serves. We know that diverse and inclusive organizations are more creative, innovative, and productive.
To create a workplace where every federal public servant has what they need to do their very best work so that they can do their best for Canada and for its citizens. Thank you so much, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now from the Canadian Human Rights Commission, Marie-Claude Landry, Chief Commissioner, 7 minutes.
Yeah. Good morning. Bonjour à tous. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
To take part in your study of Bill C-81. With me is Marcella Day, Senior Policy Advisor at the Commission. The Commission is an independent agency of Canada Human Rights and the Canada's Human Rights Watchdog. Bill C-81 is a positive step towards ensuring that everybody can live free from barriers. Barriers in the buildings we work in. Barriers built into the technology we use. And barriers created by attitudes and stigma that prevent people from contributing fully to society. This bill will improve accessibility. And so, we congratulate the government on this important, very important initiative. For the CHRC, the bill provides for a new accessibility commissioner and a new accessibility unit. It also designates the CHRC as the monitoring mechanism for the UN CRPD, and we welcome this designation. The Canadian Human Rights Commission supports this bill, and we urge its passage. I would like to highlight 2 sets of changes that the CHRC believes will have a positive impact on the success of the bill's implementation. Our first suggestion is about making sure the legislation begins to work immediately. This comes in 2 parts. 1, the bill states that the government may choose to put in place regulations. We believe that the legislation should require government to make regulations. It needs more. It needs a kickstart to action. We recommend in subsection 117.1 to change may to shall and to add the words which may include at the end of this subsection. We therefore propose that subsection 117.1 will now read as follows. Subject to sections 118, 120, the Governor in Council shall make regulations which may include. We also recommend that the bill require timelines to be set for organizations to meet any standard which is passed into regulation. We propose to add to the end of subsection 117.1c the words and timelines for their implementation. With our proposal, subsection 117.1c will now read as follows. Establishing standards intended to remove barriers and to improve accessibility in the areas referred to in Section 5 and timelines for their implementation. With both these changes, we believe the legislation will inspire and compel concrete action. It will ensure that neither the government nor organizations will be able to let good intentions gather dust. And it will embed accountability. Our suggestion is about the lack of clarity around the application of this legislation in First Nation communities. They are not excluded, but they are also not specifically included. We are concerned that this lack of clarity may lead to a gap in human rights protection for Indigenous peoples. This is why we welcome the government's commitment for more robust consultation with First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis Nation. The Commission is familiar with the consequences of excluding a group of people from human rights protections. Prior to 2008, Section 67 of the Canadian Human Rights Act excluded persons living on First Nations reserves. It was intended as a temporary measure. It remained for 30 years. We must ensure that such gap does not happen again. Bill C-81 has the potential to bring about incredibly positive changes for those living with disabilities in First Nations communities. We urge the government to work quickly in consultation with First Nations towards the effective implementation of the Accessible Canada Act on reserves. Such work must, of course, take into account their rights, unique interests, and circumstances. We also encourage the government to provide adequate resources to First Nation governments to meet the urgent needs that exist in far too many communities. On last note before I conclude, during your review of the bill, you will likely hear many concerns, including about the very broad exemption powers in the Act and the lack of recognition of American Sign Language in la langue des signes québécoise. We believe that concerns of civil society, such as these, merit consideration by this committee. The CHRC is committed to putting in place the people, tools, expertise, and partnerships needed to play our part in this ambitious legislation. This includes our setting up of working groups with CTA, CRTC, FPSLREB, and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. I want to thank you again, and we, Marcella Day and me, look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Now from Canada Post Corporation, we have Jessica L. McDonald, Chair of the Board of Directors and Interim President and Chief Executive Officer. 7 minutes.
Merci et bonjour à tous.
Thank you and good morning to everyone.
for inviting Canada Post to participate in this important discussion on Bill C-81. My name is Jessica McDonald. As you've said, I'm chair of the board of directors, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Susan Margulies, who is senior vice president of corporate affairs. It's a pleasure to be here today and to speak to the committee. Identifying, removing, and preventing physical and non-visible barriers in the workplace and society is an incredibly important issue for our country, but also for Canada Post. We fully support Bill C-81 as proposed and embrace the goals of the legislation. Canada Post recognizes the significance of this legislation to Canadian citizens, the Government of Canada, and parliamentarians, including our minister, who's a champion for accessibility and removing barriers. We also know that as a Crown corporation, we can and must always do more in this area. Identifying, removing, and preventing barriers is a continuous evolution. Canada Post takes very seriously its obligations under the Canadian Human Rights Act as well as the Employment Equity Act. Nous travaillons fort pour nous assurer.
We strive to ensure our services and facilities are accessible to all Canadians. In the next few minutes, I will outline our approach for helping to improve accessibility for our customers and employees.
It's important to understand the size and scope of our operations. More than 50,000 people, full and part-time employees, work for Canada Post, not including our subsidiaries. That makes us one of Canada's largest employers. We have the country's largest retail network with nearly 6,200 post offices across Canada. Most of these are operated in urban centres, but many are operated out of very diverse locations like pharmacies, corner stores, or people's homes, often in remote reaches of the country. We've learned from experience that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work when it comes to providing services. We deliver to more than 16 million residential and business addresses in every corner of the country. We're proud to partner with small businesses across Canada, and we understand their importance to the Canadian economy. We recognize the need for our services to be as accessible as possible to help small business owners and customers with disabilities. It's our job to serve Canadians, and we're proud to do so. Because of our size and scope, we're keenly aware of the importance of removing barriers for Canadians with physical and non-visible disabilities. We understand that the nature of disabilities can be as diverse as the people who experience them. In supporting the legislation, we also know it will take some time to fully grasp how it will affect Canada Post. We're looking forward to better understanding the impacts and the opportunities from Bill C-81. Being a large organization with legacy infrastructure in communities across Canada, we recognize it will require significant effort and resources to make improvements going forward, but we are absolutely committed to respecting the legislation and the regulations once adopted. As you may recall, the Government of Canada launched a review of Canada Post to better position us for the future. Based on feedback from the public and stakeholders, the government announced a new vision for Canada Post earlier this year. One of those pillars was to enhance our existing accessible delivery program. Canada Post is committed to ensuring that all customers, including seniors and persons with disabilities, have access to their mail and parcels. This specifically includes persons living on First Nations reserves. We have a dedicated team in place to respond to each customer's needs on a case-by-case basis and together determine appropriate accommodation options. But again, we know we can do more and improve our processes. We take our duty to remove barriers and accommodate disabilities and mobility issues very seriously. We're working diligently to ensure our operations and services respect Canadians' right to dignity, autonomy, and privacy, and that everyone has equal opportunity to access our services and compete for a job. Dans tous les secteurs de nos opérations,
In all aspects of our operations, when a situation of inaccessibility is brought to Canada Post's attention, We take action to address the situation as quickly as possible.
81 is an opportunity to improve accessibility to our services and facilities to meet the needs and expectations of an aging population. The 2016 census showed that for the first time in Canadian history, seniors now outnumber children in Canada. There are now nearly 6 million seniors in Canada, and by 2031, close to 1 in 4 Canadians could be 65 years of age or older. So we absolutely recognize the need to adjust our operations accordingly. We have also been working hard on creating an accessibility advisory panel. This panel will provide ongoing input and be a forum for dialogue that will help us make delivery services more accessible to persons with disabilities and to seniors. We're very delighted that some leading experts and strong advocates with lived experience have agreed to sit on the panel and take on this important role. We expect to announce the Accessibility Advisory Panel very soon. I wanted to quickly share some of the other services we currently provide that make it easier for people with disabilities to access our postal products and services. Par exemple, nos points.
In our retail locations, examples include access ramps, electronic doors, accessible payment devices, and the welcoming of service animals.
Impaired, we provide a literature for the blind service that allows specific items used by blind persons to be mailed for free, such as materials impressed in Braille and sound recordings such as CDs. For the hearing impaired, we have a dedicated toll-free TTY customer service line. We also provide instruction to our employees on how to deal with customers with visual or hearing impairments. We are also committed to making our website accessible to all Canadians. Some of the accessibility features include keyboard shortcut options for navigating without a mouse, an ability to change text size, and quick access links. We also have a disability management team. Canada Post provides training for employees on how to accommodate physical and non-visible disabilities in the workplace. Our collective agreements with our unions all address accessibility. We collaborate with unions and have joint decision-making on how to remove barriers. Each union also has a specific committee with Canada Post on respecting human rights. As a major federal employer, service provider, and procurement of services, Canada Post recognizes this legislation and its regulations will impact many aspects of our organization going forward. The legislation will require us to identify, remove, and prevent barriers in 6 key areas that are identified in the bill. Recognizing that we have much work to do in this area, I also want to note that Canada Post is in the process of hiring a Director of Accessibility Policy. This is an important step as we work to improve accessibility at Canada Post. We know that this work will require a lot of resources, but as I mentioned earlier, we welcome this important legislation and we embrace its goals. Nous espérons que nos efforts.
We hope that our efforts and continued commitment to doing more demonstrate the importance Canada Post places on improving accessibility for our customers and for our employees.
Canada Post, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting us to appear. We applaud the government and members of the committee for working to remove barriers and improve accessibility for all Canadians through Bill C-81. This is an important conversation and we are very happy to contribute to it. Our approach to improving accessibility has evolved over many years and aligns with the goals outlined in the bill. We look forward to further understanding what the legislation will mean for Canada Post going forward. We would be very happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you. You kept a very good pace. We didn't get any complaints from interpretation, so thank you. And just as a reminder, before we get into questions, to my colleagues, please take your time with your questions. And to start off, MP Barlow, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all our witnesses for being here this morning. It's a very full end of the table. I appreciate your time, certainly. I'm going to direct a couple of questions, and if I'm directing it to the wrong place, if you don't mind maybe just shuffling it off, I'm not exactly sure how everybody, or you can share. But one of the questions I had that came up really with the minister's presentation on Tuesday is, the different levels of departments and officials who are going to be overseeing this bill and the implementation of this bill. We have the Accessibility Commissioner, Canadian Human Rights Commission, Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization, the United Nations Convention of Persons with Disabilities. There seems to be a lot of different layers. I'm just wondering, maybe Ms. LaRoche or Ms. Landry, if you can kind of explain to me what the hierarchy of this implementation and long-term overseeing of this legislation. Who's going to be in charge of what? And my concern with this is, I think all of us around this table agree that this is the right direction to go, but sometimes more does not help. And I'm just concerned that there's going to be so many different layers of bureaucracy and departments overseeing this that it's not going to be implemented as efficiently, as quickly as we would certainly like. So if one of you can kind of explain to me how this is going to work.
Why don't I start, and then my colleague will maybe speak a little bit more about the Accessibility Commissioner, since that relates more specifically to her. I can't really speak to the architecture that's in the legislation, because that is Minister Qualtrough and the Department of ESDC who are the policy leads for that and who designed it. But what I can tell you is that in my own case, my job, I am not another layer of bureaucracy. We're actually a small task team. We're going to be about 10 people. And our job is to actually help connect some of the dots, because there are so many different players involved. If you look at the 6 different pillars that are contained in the legislation, so procurement, well, Treasury Board has a policy responsibility for procurement. Built environment, Treasury Board has a policy responsibility for built environment. Same thing with information and communications technologies. But Public Services and Procurement Canada has a huge role to play in the actual procurement and the actual acquisition and management of our built environment. So there is by necessity a need for coordination, and that's part of my job, is in terms of helping to get the federal public service ready, is making sure that we are working in a coordinated way as we start to develop the strategy, so we know who's accountable for what and by when, and what they're expected to do. So that's a little bit about how we're going to be organizing. But peut-être Marie-Claire pourrait parler un petit peu du commissaire.
Yeah, what I would suggest is my colleague will start and I will add on.
So thank you for the question. What I would say about governance overall is that this is a complex system, but that does not mean it cannot be a very effective system. So the interplay between the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and domestic charter and human rights provisions are really critical to harmonize, and this bill does that. So it takes those 3 bodies or those 3 governing statutes and says that they should work in complement with each other. And then it recognizes the complexity which exists partly in the federal system, which includes the sectoral bodies regulated by the CTA and the CRTC. But it also recognizes that some folks won't be able to reach out to those because they work in the federal public service, for example, or they work in areas which are in private industry and are not governed by those 2 bodies. So the complexity that you are seeing in the bill is partially simply a representation of the complexity in society. But what this bill does do is tries to harmonize that complexity, and it does so in very specific ways, which our Chief Commissioner can speak to. It requires us to harmonize all of the complaint systems at the front door, and it requires us to collaborate on policies and practices. And it also offers very welcomed oversight in the system. So those 3 layers of sort of international and domestic legislation, governance, which recognizes the diversity of sectoral bodies in Canada, and the very appropriate oversight role are elements which, although at first glance they may appear as a bureaucracy, can actually drive this country to better accessibility, because they will be able to lean on each other for their various roles. and I'll let the chief speak.
About 40 seconds.
Yeah, what I will add is the Commission recognized the technical expertise, long experience of other sectoral bodies in dealing with their specific and sometimes technical areas of jurisdiction, and they are experts in their respective field. What is important for the Canadian Human Rights Commission for us is the no wrong door policy. Human rights should not be exclusive to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It's something that we should all care about. And the most important thing I would say is the fact that in the bill, it's clear that there is a call for cooperation, and we already start this work to make sure that we will have this cooperation in between us, make sure that we will do good for people who needs all of us.
Thank you.
But the most important word is the no wrong door policy.
Thank you very much. Now for 6 minutes, MP Morrissey, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Madame Laroche. You're the first Deputy Minister appointed with sole responsibility for accessibility. You referenced you had a small team, 10. Could you briefly elaborate on how that's going to allow you the ability to support the whole of government approach that this legislation, and the minister in particular, is emphatic occurs?
Thank you so much for the question. I think the goal in creating my job and in setting up my unit is a recognition that you need a small group of individuals who are actually going to help drive that change. But as the commissioner said, it can't be the responsibility of one group of people or one individual. It requires a big collaborative effort. You need to mobilize the machinery of government. And I'm very fortunate that I have colleagues like my colleagues at the table, Alex and Cal, deputy ministers throughout the system who are going to be part of this. As I mentioned earlier, there are 6 pillars in the legislation, and there are different departments and organizations throughout the Government of Canada that are responsible for actually delivering on those different pillars. So my job and the job of my team is to help build those connections. I really like the hub and spoke model. We are a small hub, and it's our mandate and our responsibility to connect to all of the different players in the system to make sure that we're aware of what they're doing, that we're connecting what they're doing, that we're learning from each other, and together we're going to build that strategy which we have committed to designing for the government.
Do you think you could do that without Bill C-81? Is C-81 the integral piece that was missing to ensure a whole of government approach?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I think the reason my job has been created is there's a recognition that the Government of Canada needs to show leadership. So certainly C-81 has helped to galvanize and focus the attention. Would we have gotten there anyway? I think we were starting to move in that direction, but having a deadline, knowing that the act is going to be proclaimed, we hope, in the coming year, and being told that we need to have a strategy ready for implementation a year after the date it comes into effect really does help to focus the attention. So, and it also helps to focus the attention from the perspective of we know what the act is trying to achieve. We know the areas it's going to be looking at. So it allows us to start to better focus our own efforts and not necessarily be going off in a million different directions. So it is helping.
Do I?
2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Oh.
Lots of time.
And again to Madame Laroche, a comment that disturbed me as a member of Parliament was in your statement was public servants suffer higher rates of harassment, people with disabilities. And this, how will this legislation begin to correct that?
Thank you for the question. You know, before I took on this job, I was the Deputy Minister champion for public servants with disabilities. In fact, the first Deputy Minister champion to actually have a disability to be the champion for public servants with employees. And one of the things I wanted to do when I took on that job was to actually try and understand what's the status quo. And so we took a look at, we do an annual, now it's annual, it used to be triennial public service employee survey. And I wanted to understand the data. And Cal, my colleague in Okro, they do an excellent analysis of that. And you can actually disaggregate the data by how people have self-identified. You can do it by gender, by language group, by occupational group, and by people who've self-identified as having a disability. And in successive surveys, we see that people with disabilities report at a much higher level than the norm for other public servants, higher levels of harassment, higher levels of discrimination. When you try and unpack that a little bit and actually talk to public servants, what could be driving that? I think one of the key issues that's driving that is a feeling that the environment isn't designed to support people with disabilities. So whether our buildings are not accessible, whether washroom facilities are not accessible, whether our technology works for our employees, if it takes you 6 months to get access to a piece of technology that can actually help you do your job properly, you can then see that when that annual survey comes around and says, you know, do you feel you've been discriminated against? Do you feel harassed? That might help to explain a little bit about that. So in thinking about the strategy that we're designing, we're trying to say, okay, well, how could we change that? So do we need to put a first focus then on building a welcoming environment? And how do we then track the changes? The good thing is we do annual surveys. So it will actually allow us to measure our progress and say, okay, are these actions that we're taking, are they actually making the difference that we need? So we're using that data piece to actually help us measure our results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now over to MP Hardcastle, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as this is my first opportunity to have the floor in the public session today, I'd like to point out that I have Mr. David Yordega here today, a member of Parliament whose private member's business has inspired us to look at definitions of disability, and in particular, episodic disabilities. And I have tabled a motion that I would like to bring forward at this time, sir.
Would you like to read the motion?
Somebody have a copy? I gotta find, I thought you had it, so,
We'll just distribute it,
okay,
but if you want to read it into the record.
okay. Give me a minute, I thought. I'll have to find it on my,
I want to get on this.
Thank you.
thank you for that indulgence. That the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities provide recommendations for legislative and policy changes necessary to ensure that the needs of persons with episodic disabilities caused, among other things, by multiple sclerosis be adequately protected to ensure equity in government policy to support Canadians across all types of disability. That the committee report to the House by February 2019, and that it be instructed to request a comprehensive government response to its report pursuant to Standing Order 109.
Thank you. Mr. Long, I'm going to pause that.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that the debate be now adjourned.
Any debate? No, we don't debate on that. No, okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Ms. Hardcastle, you have 3 minutes and 55 seconds left for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for indulging our rules of procedure, but it's probably got you thinking about definitions. I'd like to hear your thoughts about how the definition in C81 can be strengthened, or how does it serve its purpose effectively as it is? Your thoughts, please. And whoever would like to go first, I was very intrigued to hear all of your comments earlier. Ms. Day and Deputy Minister LaRoche, Ms. Landry, Ms. McDonald.
Well, I'd be happy to go first. Thank you very much for raising that. From my perspective, the spirit and intent of the legislation is the most important thing. And from Canada Post perspective, we recognize that we have a lot of discovery ahead of us in terms of the barriers and the opportunities to ensure that we're both delivering so that there is full accessibility, as well as employing and being an employer who both embraces and supports people with disabilities. We recognize that that includes both visible and non-visible disabilities, and I think the only way that one can truly understand and respond to and support people who need any form of extra support in the workplace or as a customer is by deeply respecting the spirit and intent, which from my perspective would be the broadest understanding possible.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in? Ms. Landry?
Yeah, I would say that thank you for your question. The episodic or temporary or episodic in nature, it's already in the definition of this bill. And what is important in our review at the Canadian Human Rights Commission is every person who suffers of a disability should find themselves in the act. This is an important principle, and it's consistent with human rights law, including the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada that has generally given a broad and liberal approach to the definition of disability. That's the most important thing, and people should find themselves in the act.
Okay, and maybe Ms. Day, if you could expand a little bit more on how we would harmonize a complaint system at the front door. What do you think we all have to get our heads around? I had a private member's bill regarding that very thing, I thought. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about what our approach should be in order to ensure that there is such a harmonization.
Oh, am I on? Oh, someone else turned me on. Thank you, mystery person. Thank you very much for the question. There are different options in order to encourage and embed this kind of harmonization so that people who are trying to find the right place to file their complaints find it easily and simply and without a lot of bureaucracy or delay. That is certainly a key concern of stakeholders. We have heard it, the other regulating agencies have heard it. The bill responds in a specific way in that it provides us with both the authorities and the requirements to coordinate better. So there are a series of clauses in the bill, starting at 122, which require all of those organizations who can receive complaints to work together in order to ensure that complaints find their way in a way that does not create additional barriers at the front end. So we take that very seriously. We have actually already met, as our Chief Commissioner mentioned, with the other 5 agencies which are involved in complaints processing in order to begin that work. And we have established 2 working groups, one on the compliance side and one on the no wrong door policy, to develop procedures which will help make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. MP Long for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to our presenters this morning. Very, very informative. I want to focus specifically on timelines, and I just want to go maybe across all the panel. Minister Qualtrough talked about timelines, and basically said one of the issues with timelines is that people will wait until that date. And if anything, they may not be as productive. So Ontario, I understand, is timelines, but what they've done is actually slowed changes down because, again, businesses wait until that time to implement change. It technically acts as a deterrent. Are you at all concerned that timelines actually make accessibility implementation longer? I'll start with you, Ms. Lander.
So thank you again for the question. Timelines are certainly a concern, both from the point of view of people with disabilities who want solutions put in place faster, and from the point of view of those regulated bodies who want to be able to meet their obligations in a timely way. This bill does not have specific dates in it, and the amendments which we have proposed do not propose specific dates, so it does not indicate, for example, that Canada should be barrier-free by 2030, for example. Part of the reason for that is that constant improvement is required under this bill. It's part of progressive realization. A barrier which does not appear today might appear tomorrow, and so the target will always be changing, and that's appropriate in Canada, where technology and infrastructure that affects our wide country is developing as quickly as it is. The timelines that do matter are the timelines to put in place regulations and for organizations to implement those regulations. And the two amendments which the Canadian Human Rights Commission has put forward address both of those. By integrating shall into the clause requiring government to make regulations, it will kickstart that time frame. And what the courts, including the Supreme Court in a decision recently this year, has said is that those timeframes need to be reasonable, they cannot be indefinite, and they need to move forward.
Thank you. Ms. LaRoche?
Thank you. As an organization that's going to be subject to the legislation, we're not waiting. So we're moving forward now to start to implement some of the changes that we think will make things better for our employees with disabilities. Alex can maybe speak a little bit about his digital strategy launch and some of the work you're doing on Next Gen as well, which is all about accessibility.
Happy to. So as of April 1st, 2018, our new information technology policy requires accessibility by default for new systems bought or developed. We've also issued a few weeks ago Government of Canada digital standards, which is going to be required for the development, or the application of these standards will be required for the development of new services to Canadians, where accessibility by default is also not a nice to have, but a must have. So in a lot of cases, we have started putting in place the rules preemptively around accessibility of systems in the Government of Canada.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald?
The words have been taken out of my mouth. We're not waiting. We are already underway. As everything that is in motion today, whether it's a retrofit of our retail operations or any other initiative across the company, we are quickly reviewing, revising, and prioritizing accessibility. The accessibility panel, as I say, is imminent in terms of announcement, and we're hiring a director now to review accessibility policy.
Thank you very much. Ms. McDonald, one of the more interesting presenters I've seen in HUMA in my 3 years, his name was Randy Lewis, and he was the vice president of Walgreens. And he talked about how he transformed his distribution centers using people with disabilities as employees. Absenteeism went down, productivity went up, turnover went down. So with respect, and he talked about the cultural shift. It took a cultural shift. I mean, we can put legislation in and C81 and bring that forward, but it also takes a cultural shift from the top. So, you know, I compare Walgreens and their distribution centers to Canada Post and their distribution centers. So can you just talk to how C81 will transform, not your, I want to talk about your delivery programs in a second, but just internally, the distribution centers, Canada Post itself, how C81 will transform that, will break down barriers for people with disabilities, and also if you can talk to what have you done over the past maybe a year or two to break down those barriers?
Sure.
About 45 seconds, please.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for pointing me to that testimony. I'll be very interested and will personally find it and read it. And learning from others, I think, is one of the first lessons for all of us. In terms of our distribution centers in particular, I think you were using that as an example rather than necessarily just the focus.
Right.
The operations of Canada Post are legacy systems, and as well they're complex in terms of sorting and getting parcels and mail out and to customers. We need to and do work very closely with the union in terms of making any alterations to how that works. And so one of our most important steps will be to be working collaboratively in terms of employee suggestions as to how things can work differently, but as well in terms of agreeing on a supportive workplace that includes more successfully people with disabilities, but can also work for all. I have only been at Canada Post since December, so I can't speak to the last 2 years, but my Vice President, Susan Margulies, could add to this. But in the time that I have been here, there has, as I said, been a tremendous effort because it is one of the pillars of my mandate letter to address accessibility. And so bringing and asking for the support of people with lived experience to help us understand what are the correct changes in terms of ensuring that we're delivering in a way that is accessible for all is something we are 100% focused on and has been an area of great attention for me since I've been here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. MP Rumi, please.
Thank you all for being here today, for helping us go through this important piece of legislation. I'm going to start off with Ms. Landry. We've been hearing anywhere from 50 to 60% of the complaints that are being heard are disability complaints. A couple of questions on that. Do we have a sense of what those complaints are? Are we tracking that so that we're able to understand how this legislation can impact those complaints?
And just a reminder, folks, just to keep your pace nice and slow. We got lots of time.
Was I going too fast?
Yes, overall disability complaints usually make up between 57 and 60% at the Commission of all complaints that we received. About half of these are related to accessibilities. From 2008 to September 2018, the Commission received 4,171 disability-related complaints.
So now, but are those complaints, when we're talking about accessibility, do we know if it's infrastructure, if it's technological, like?
It could be employments, could be services, it could be transportations, could be communications, could be accessible building.
But is that information available to us? Like, would we be able to see a breakdown of what, without privacy, of course?
So I will say that what we do know is that 81% of them are related to employment, 18% on services, 8% in regards to the physical environment, 1% in regards to transportation, and just less than 0.5% around communications and technology. Those data that we gather, however, are not as rigorous as we could have in our system. Our system isn't designed well to pull out relevant data that is well connected to the areas which are outlined under this Act, and we look forward to building a more robust system in order to come back and report in more detail.
Do you feel that this legislation can and will address some of those complaints? Can help to address?
As my colleague mentioned, what we need is to have the proper tool to report on that specifically, and this is what we are doing actually. The Canadian Human Rights Commission is working to making sure that we will be able to report on that with the appropriate tools. And for sure, for that, we need appropriate fund and appropriate resources. And I should say that the fund at the Canadian Human Rights Commission have not been increased since 14 years. Then it's sure that it's a challenge that we have.
Okay, Thank
and
you.
this is something that we are working
Do you
on.
want to add something?
I would. If I can just add that we don't know what the impact of this bill will be on the portion of our complaints that deal with accessibility. Our first instinct might be to say that because accessibility will be dealt with more proactively, that those complaints might go down. But I have to say that the very, very wide consultation process and the engagement of people with disabilities in this country may counteract that intuitive guess. So people with disability in this country are very engaged, and they may in fact bring more complaints to us. So we may in fact see a growth in complaints due to a growth in awareness.
Thank you for getting that on the record. I'm going to move to Ms. McDonald from Canada Post. Now, for what we just heard, 50,000 employees, I can't even imagine how you even begin to try to move forward. So could you quickly tell us that you are being proactive already? And from your testimony, you're saying that you're trying to address a lot of these issues. How do you see this moving forward? And specifically, we talked a little bit about timelines, but the timelines were for when we implement the legislation or the regulations. But how do you see implementing future, as we move forward, what those regulations would be and how would they apply to your organization?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying, as I said in my opening remarks, that we have a tremendous amount of work to do, which I'll state another way. We have a tremendous amount of opportunity in this area. As you say, with 50,000 employees, we have a great representation of people with challenges at work. The legislation and its intent addresses what I will call, myself as a civilian, not a professional expert in this area, but I'll call, for example, mental health issues, non-visible disabilities, and when you think about the diversity of challenges that people may have in the workplace and how the workplace can contribute to those, in addition to the more standard way that some people may look at disabilities in the workplace being addressing the physical disabilities, which is an area where we all also do put attention but can put more attention. There is just a tremendous diversity of understanding that we need to gain inside the organization about how we can better support employees in a very demanding field of work. As you may be aware, we've got tremendous change happening in terms of what it means to be a delivery company that had been focused on letter mail and is now on parcels. And so when it comes to either physical or non-visible challenges, there's a lot more that we need to understand so that we build future systems in a supportive way for employees. And that is where there is a tremendous amount of collaborative work needed with our employees. In order to bring out the discussion properly, it's my view that we need better processes of talking with our employees and understanding how they feel today. And introducing employee surveys, for example, is something that we need to do more of. Changing the language inside the organization of how we refer to disabilities and how we respect people's challenges is another area. We are underrepresented in our workforce with respect to people with disabilities. We need to understand if we have exhausted the efforts of ensuring that we provide appropriate accommodations, but also appear to be a welcoming employer for people who could be very productive employees and great contributors if they were supported in the right way. So this is a very broad question, and when I talk about our physical infrastructure, we have a tremendous amount of work to do. When we talk about the organization itself, its culture, its processes, its understanding of its employees, and employees' level of confidence that the workplace is supportive and will adapt is an area where we've got a tremendous amount of work to do. The key for me as interim CEO is the immediate hiring, which we're underway with, of a director of accessibility policy. That's key for us in terms of having a champion and somebody with the responsibility to drive all of this forward and ensuring that we're not missing any opportunities and that we can report back on very specific progress.
Thank you very much. MP Falk.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank you all for being here and sharing your experience and what's going on currently. So my first question would be for the Human Rights Commission. So in Bill C-81, the Accessibility Commissioner is responsible for compliance and enforcement activities. So how does the role of the Accessibility Commissioner differ from the current powers that the Canadian Human Rights Commissioner? How does that differ?
The Accessibility Commissioner will have the specific mandate to audit, to receive complaint, it will be a specific mandate. I have a broad mandate to receive the application and receive complaint and do promotion and education under the Canadian Human Rights Act. But for the Accessibility Commissioner, that's going to be specifically focused on the Accessibility Act, which is the specific mandate that he received by the Act.
Okay, thank you. The legislation, so the legislation provides the Accessibility Commissioner with the powers to enter a place, to verify compliance, and to prevent non-compliance. So this is a very broad power. And is there a risk that the proposed compliance mechanisms would infringe on the freedoms that are guaranteed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
Could you be a bit more specific about which freedoms you might be thinking that would be impaired?
Well, just with the power to enter, so 73, subject to subsection 7, the Accessibility Commissioners may, for a purpose related to verifying compliance or preventing non-compliance with any of the sections 47 to 49, 56 to 58, 65 to 67, and 69 to 71, or any other provision of regulations made under subsection...
She needs to slow, you just need to slow it down a smidge.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Made under subsection 117(1), enter any place, including a conveyance in which he or she has reasonable grounds to believe there is any record, report, electronic data, or other document, or any information or thing relevant to that purpose. So I guess what I'm interested in is the process of this. Are we going to see the Accessibility Commissioner just going into places, taking data, or doing whatever could happen? So I'm just interested in the process, and if the process would infringe, I guess, just on a person's Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
So I'm not a lawyer, so I don't think I can answer that question completely, but I can give you my brief insights. First of all, the characterization of that body of activity is more akin to an auditor who would be more likely to make an appointment to come into an organization, be guided partly by communications with that organization in order to gather information. So I'd say less a SWAT team and more an inspector. So those kinds of powers are not unusual. People like health inspectors or building code inspectors have those powers, and where they are legal and appropriate and they meet the mandate of the legislation, they are generally permissible. Does that help?
Thank you. My next question, I believe, will be for Canada Post. So I live in a rural community, and I know that you had mentioned this in your remarks that, that services it's not a one-all approach for different services. So in many rural and remote communities, local businesses are authorized dealers for Canada Post. So will these businesses be required to comply with the accessibility standards established through Bill C-81? So I'm talking about sometimes those small towns of about 400 people or less. And will these costs associated with complying, if there is costs to these standards, be the responsibility of the local business?
Thank you very much. And in both rural and urban areas, we do partner with small businesses. I can appreciate that in rural areas, these may be smaller operations. But in terms of accessibility at facilities that we partner with but do not own, our contracts actually specify already that the facilities must comply with the legislation, and that the Canadian Human Rights Act and any associated CSA standard must apply. This is in our existing legislation. We'll need to work in a very supportive way with outlets, it's particularly smaller ones, so that they understand what that means in practice. But absolutely, to answer your question, it does extend.
For sure, thank you. And has there been a cost analysis done to determine the estimated costs that could be for complying with the accessibility standards?
Not yet. Not yet.
Is that, do you know when that would be expected?
Well, there will be a tremendous, tremendous amount of work is what I was trying to avoid saying, but it's true, involved in assessing all of our physical infrastructure. And we have that underway, just beginning to look at how to dive into the entire system, from retail outlets to, our transportation, to our internal, logistical systems and headquarters.
Is there an estimation of how long that is going to take?
No, I honestly can't answer that question. I wish I could. What I'd like to tell you in principle is that it's a huge priority for us. It's just a tremendous amount of work given the scale of Canada Post's operations. As I say, it's one of the keys, reasons why we need a director who is able to plot out an entire roadmap and get timelines against it. We'll be very happy to transparently report what that work plan is and what the timelines are associated with it. The main thing I want to convey to you is what a significant priority this is for us, and I'm sorry that I can't answer all the questions at this very early stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. MP Senga for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. So my questions will be mostly regarding the Human Rights Commission, and any one of you, Madam Claude or Madam Laundry, anyone there, you can answer my questions. See, as a Human Rights Commission chair and Human Rights organization being involved into that, you are already dealing with most of the complaints from the persons with a disability. I think more than 60% complaints comes to you regarding the disabled persons. And dealing those complaints, you are not able to give them fully relief because some of the this accessibility standards were not met, and you are not able to provide better results in that. Do you think now, with the implementation of the Act C81, you will be performing the better duties, you will be giving better progress report on that, or your accessibility standards will be met better than the earlier one?
I think that it's complementary. We have the complaint process, and this is addressed some problematic, but the things with the bill, it's a proactive bill that's gonna bring a completely different way to address problematic, to address systematic situation of accessibilities or the lack of accessibilities. And for me, that's going to bring the fact that it's under the Canadian Human Rights Commission and Act will give us more a broad and larger set of tools to address the accessibilities problematic or
You want to add something?
I can just give more details and perhaps a story. The way the system works now, someone has to be discriminated against and then file a complaint and get individual remedy. That is the only complaint process that exists right now. So if 100 people try and get in a building, 99 will leave and one might have the wherewithal to file a complaint and get a resolution. Sometimes those resolutions result in systemic changes, but sometimes they are individual remedies. What this act will do is give us two new tools. Number one, it will require organizations to change things so that hopefully 100 people can get into that building so that there is no need for a complaint. And the requirements for compliance have teeth. And that goes back to the inspection powers. We can inspect and we can make judgments on whether someone is meeting a standard or not. And if they are not, they can be found in violation and they can face large fines if they are in violation. So it is an encouragement to do better. The new system also creates a complaint where somebody, maybe that 99th person or 100th person, tries to get in and they still can't get in, and what they discover is that organization has not implemented the standard. And in the new system, there's only one type of complaint, and that is a complaint where a standard has not been implemented. And the resolution of that complaint is to implement the standard and remedy the harm. So it gives us two robust new tools to identify and address issues that place less of a burden on those 99 people who couldn't get in the first place and less of a burden on the one person who had to shoulder the complaint under the Act.
When we talk about development of the accessibility standards and the implementation of the accessibility standards, I have already heard here that you told that most of the you try to have the consultations and you get better information from the general public. So do you think that this Act C81 will provide the better provisions for bringing the regulatory changes, or better to get it from the general public?
So I'd say this bill has excellent provisions which actually require every regulated entity to consult both with their employees who have disabilities and with members of the public. And they must consult as they develop their accessibility plans, as they develop their feedback mechanisms, and as they issue their progress reports, which means that somebody doesn't even have to try and get in the building in order to discover there's a problem. They can be part of an accessible advisory council and help identify the problems at the front end. So the role of persons with disabilities is seen now more as an expert body to assist in developing good regulations. And in fact, the requirement for CASDO to include half of the members as people with disabilities will help ensure that standards and regulations are created with those people with disabilities and their lived experience baked right in. These are very strong developments that will help the system.
So that means better to have the consultation from the public, and standards laid down by the section will also, both of them will help.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood.
The standards which are going to be laid down into this bill C81 and information which you are getting from the public, both will be helpful for making improvements in the regulation.
Both will be helpful, and both will be built with the voices of persons with disabilities built right in. It gives effect to the mantra in the United Nations Convention of Persons with Disabilities, nothing about us without us.
Thank you. MP Dion for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the people at the committee here today. I'm looking back at the this is for Ms. LaRoche. You're talking about hiring basically 5,000 people with disabilities. So will there be an attempt to have a balance of disabilities? So in other words, people with visual impairment, mental disabilities, mobility disabilities, and maybe episodic disabilities. Will that attempt be made?
Thank you so much for the question. I'll start off with maybe a general comment and then ask my colleague Carl to provide a bit more details. Certainly, there's no intention as we're developing the strategy to bring in 5,000 new employees to focus on any one group. The idea is to attract as many great public servants, potential public servants with disabilities, without focusing on any one area. And one of the challenges to doing that, and something that our colleagues at the Public Service Commission are working on, is how do you make sure that your actual recruitment tools, so just going out to search for people, how do you make sure that those are as accessible as possible for people suffering from a range of different disabilities. So, Cal, I don't know if you have any other details you want to give on the 5,000.
Not a whole lot, but just a few points. So on that, there should be no distinction made in terms of who it is that is being recruited. The effort is a broad effort to try and attract 5,000 new employees with disabilities between now and 2025. But this is embryonic work right now, so we are working with the Public Service Commission on devising how it is that we're going to go about attracting approximately 1,000 persons per year. So a bit early to give the details of how the approach is going to be, but there's definitely no intent to have distinctions made between the disabilities.
But I guess that's to say that all people with all disabilities will be looked upon, especially people, including people with episodic disabilities. So they're all going to be reached out to.
Yes. So yes.
Okay. And what about? I'm assuming that there would also be a balance, gender balance, and also looking to Indigenous peoples and visible minorities. Is there going to be any special effort in that regard?
I think it's really important. Thank you again for the question that you're raising. When you look at some of the data on where disability happens, we do see a prevalence, for example, among Indigenous Canadians. And so it's really important that our outreach efforts are also taking into account regional distribution, gender, but of course also looking at our Indigenous peoples as well. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. And this is for Ms. McDonald from Canada Post. I know that it's very early on in the game here, but can you paint a picture? I mean, I think we all think of we most often think of barriers as being wheelchair ramps and automatic doors. But can you paint a picture about what other possible barriers could exist throughout your 6,200 post offices?
Sure. Well, I think it goes from everything from how we communicate, how we present ourselves, so that if we have not thought of what someone's challenge might be, that they feel welcome asking for support. I think when you mention, being accessible to wheelchairs and having doors that are able to open, you're probably referring to other very, very basic physical infrastructure that I think we've all come to understand and know when we see it is making an effort toward ensuring that we are accessible to those where we can build to standards and fit out to standards that are accepted for meeting people with disabilities that we can recognize. I think where I'm looking forward to understanding more is really the depth in society, particularly as people age, as well as we become more accepting and supportive in general of non-visible disabilities, that we start to understand how we can build our own standards of how we present ourselves, so that there is a better service standard for accessibility.
And just again, any more specifics? Because we all know, we've seen that people, somebody in a scooter comes up and the counter should be a certain height, the door opens, but what about, what other disabilities are your outlets having to deal with?
Very brief answer, please.
Okay. I feel like I may be missing your question, but I want to say as basic as understanding that there can be a broad range of challenges that people may have that are not visible, that you can't necessarily build for or expect standards to automatically have adapted to, and rather how we present ourselves can encourage people to tell us what their challenge is and how we can support them as a service provider. I personally approach this as being open-minded and understanding that we probably have less representation in our workforce than we even are aware of in terms of the people who will self-report for having challenges. And the same thing is true for the society that we serve. And what we need first and foremost is people with lived experience, as well as representing ourselves in a way where customers will come forward so that we can truly understand the adaptations and service approach that they want.
Thank you very much. MP Hardcastle for 3 minutes, please.
3 minutes?
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and talk slow for the interpreters, but I might have to go fast. Okay. So I just want to talk about the accountability. So the federal government is the largest employer. It's going to be the most affected by C-81. And so it's the largest organization that's going to have to obey the legislation. But at the same time, the oversight and the enforcement, the key agencies that do enforcement and oversight are going to have to report to the federal government. I see that as being problematic. So I know there are probably ways that we can strengthen the bill. How can we make these agencies more independent? Or instead of reporting to the federal government, do we say report to Parliament? Or have you already anticipated this? And what do you think, what are the ways that we can make sure that these agencies are operating in an independent manner?
I'm not sure that I can actually answer that question. It's a really good question, but because I'm representing the public service in terms of one of the entities that will be actually governed by the bill, and so not responsible for the policy decisions. And what's being debated right now as the bill works its way through the legislative process as to how the machinery and the mechanics work of how the different oversight bodies work together. What I can say from our perspective is that we in the Public Service of Canada, so all government departments and agencies, will be required to develop multi-year accessibility plans which are provided for in the legislation, and that becomes our accountability mechanism. That sets out what each organization is going to do under each of those 6 pillars to make the workplace environment better for people, not just public servants, but Canadians with disabilities. And what's so interesting about those multi-year accessibility plans, they are all about the spirit of nothing about us without us. Those multi-year accessibility plans aren't just going to say, here's what we're going to do, but they also require us to say, and how did you engage people with lived experience in designing these plans? And they provide for a feedback mechanism on our own implementation of the plans. What I find so powerful about that is it means that it is people with lived experience who will be contributing not just to design of the plans, but also telling us how good are we at implementing them. So again, from the perspective of the public service as one of the entities being covered by the legislation, I'm very pleased with the way those multi-year accessibility plans were designed, but maybe my colleagues want to talk about their collaborative mechanisms.
We do need to move on. Maybe there'll be an opportunity. That brings us to the end of a second round, but we have probably enough time to do a bit of a micro round, one question from each side. Please keep it on to about 2 minutes, because we do need to break for committee business before we rise today. So we're going to start. John, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question's for Ms. McDonald. And you were talking briefly on some of the other questions of the impact this could have on some of your postal outlets. And we know in the rural communities how important some of these rural outlets are. If they lose their post office, it would be a real detriment to those communities. But in Section 91 of the Act, it sets a maximum penalty of $250,000 in respect to violations of regulations. We asked the minister on Tuesday where the revenue from those infractions would go, and she said it would be going to the government's general revenue. We would like to see, or would you support an amendment that those fines would go into an enabling accessibility fund that private sector businesses that are federally regulated could access to help fund some of the changes they would have to make at some of their facilities to comply with the new legislation?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. Speaking from my role at Canada Post, I would like to think that Canada Post can be giving support to those outlets and facilities that partner with us so that we can be successful together. As I've said, the contracts that we have are already very specific about how the dealer will actually fit out their equipment, furnishings, signs, etc. And if we're doing our job well at Canada Post, working with those retail outlets, understanding that in rural areas where I've lived a lot of my life as well, these can be very small, multitask sort of outlets that don't have a lot of budget flexibility, but recognizing that we could work successfully to support them in meeting the standards.
Do you support that amendment to have that fund available rather than just going into general revenue that you could access, or some of these outlets could access?
I don't know that that I would say from Canada Post's perspective that we would need such an amendment in order to be successful with our partners.
Thank you. Wayne, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thanks again. I just want to start by saying I want to thank our interpreters for doing a wonderful job, as they always have done. I just want to get your opinion across the table here about board composition. And I know CASDO recommends a majority of persons on the board with disabilities. We had a visitor yesterday in our office that proposed a higher percentage of people with disabilities on the board of CASDO. Can you just each give me your opinion on how that board should be composed? Should it be 50 plus 1? Should it be 70%? Should it be 100%? McDonald?
Another very thoughtful question. I do think that representation from interests and lived experience and personal background needs to show the broadest diversity possible, and I think that having at least, it's a very, I'm struggling to answer your question because to put a specific number is difficult, but I
There
think
are those that say it should be 100%,
Yeah.
but there's also
I know,
balance.
50 perhaps.
Ms. LaRoche?
So I'll just share an anecdote with you, if I may. It's a great question. So over the last year, there have been some really interesting articles and reports that have come out about board diversity more generally. And the thing that's really struck me about them, when they talk about the underrepresented groups on boards, and this is whether public, not-for-profit, private, they talk about women, they talk about visible minorities, and once in a while they might talk about Indigenous peoples. They never include people with disabilities. So it's like we're not even visible enough to be counted among the disadvantaged, if you know what I mean. So again, this is a personal view.
Sure.
Just the fact that there's a recognition that people with disabilities need to be represented, particularly on bodies that are serving them, is a great start.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Long, I got to cut you off there. MP Hardcastle, you have very briefly, maybe just under 2 minutes.
Okay, same question. Thank you. Yes, I'm trying to save time.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. Thank you for your question, and I will answer in French if I may. It's going to be. Alors,
For us at the Human Rights Commission, we're at arm's length, so we report to Parliament through our ability to report to Parliament. We have an annual report, and we are the National Institute for Human Rights, and we can report on performance of the government with respect to its implementation of various acts. So to answer your question, there are mechanisms that enable us to report effectively on the government's performance, either by tabling a special report to Parliament or through our annual report, or we could make a report to the UN with respect to our country performance, or there is a mechanism, an MMM, National Monitoring Mechanism, which will allow us to fulfill this role as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think that kind of brings us to the close. I want to thank all of the witnesses, my colleagues. I think we got quite a bit of information to digest today. I do unfortunately have to ask that you vamoose fairly quickly. We have committee business and we do need to go in camera, so I will suspend to go in camera. Thank you very much, everybody.